Were you ever that one in a million? If so, what's your story? Story 1. I have a very rare skin disease that only 1 in a million people get. I've been told that I'll probably never meet another person in my life with it. Haley disease for those interested. I was diagnosed by a team of dermatologists. They had to take a biopsy of one of my many outbreaks. A picture of that particularly horrible rash is currently in a medical journal, or so I've been told. Story 2. Diagnosed with extremely rare liver disease, primary hyperoxaluria. Some 300 people in the United States currently have it. Basically pass a lot of kidney stones and need a double transplant to fix them. Also, I wanted to say to check up on people around you. I may look like a normal person, I don't have tubes running from my body, and my head may not be bald, but I still suffer mentally, and kidney stones. Just check up on your friends and family and make sure they are doing okay. Story 3. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a single little common black ant put me into an anaphylactic shock. When my allergist was preparing to start immunotherapy for me, he found that the in-office lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the infinitesimally small amount of allergen with which to start my titration. So he had to send a sample of my blood to Johns Hopkins so that their lab could determine how much to give me. I did immunotherapy for several years to reach an immune response level at which it would be safe for me to basically exist in a non-frozen climate. Good news though, I'm good now. I've had a few run-ins with ants and wasps since my immunotherapy and my body didn't freak out and shut down. I am probably safe for maybe forever. I don't have EpiPens and I'm not overly afraid of ants or bees. I live in Florida. I'm not outdoorsy, but stinging things are everywhere. It is in fact the Australia of North America. No, my parents would not move me to the frozen tundra to be a nomadic reindeer herder at my behest. Little black ants do in fact sting. Several lazy subspecies of stingers and venom. When an ant bites you, that's using its mandibles and does not deliver venom. When an ant stings you, that's using its butt needle and delivers the pain juice. Most ants do one or the other. Fire ants do both at the same time. Story 4. I was on Tinder and was talking to this guy who was supposed to meet me for dinner. I texted him and no answer. Then I texted him on Tinder. Said that he couldn't make it. However, I got a text back from the number. It wasn't the guy that I thought I texted. It was the actor Jared Butler. I thought he was lying until he FaceTimed me. Nice guy. Story 5. I have an unknown type of autosomal dominant centronuclear myopathy. My type of it is so rare that they haven't even seen it before. Getting diagnosed was a multi-year struggle. They pretty much had to rule out everything else. It doesn't feel great to be in this club by myself. Countless blood draws, MRIs, CAT scans, and a biopsy and genetic test. So far, it looks like my father and I are the only ones with it. Yay. As a researcher has pointed out, this isn't really rare, just a type that hasn't really been seen in the population yet, meaning there are certainly more people out there, just not tested or diagnosed yet. In the future, I'll probably be 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000. Sorry for making everyone think I was 1 in a million. Story 6. Not sure about the odds in this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was in an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrushable, on a tour of the desert in western China when I was like 7. The father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane didn't survive, but somehow I got out with a concussion and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert. In the wreckage of the crash, 50 kilometers from the town or airport and the edge of the desert, the people who found me were some tree planters. They plant greens in the desert to protect towns from sandstorms. A lot of people live in these desert towns in China do this. Who found me on their way picking up a shipment. And the only reason they looked was that they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand and went off the road to test. According to my dad, the theory that it might have lived was that the plane was mostly made out of fabrics and wood. So when the plane crashed, the front half collapsed and took the majority of the impact. Though I got knocked out, I was probably covered under the wreckage and the shades. It cooled me off enough to survive for a day or so. Story 7. No idea about the actual numbers, but I was born with 12 fingers, identical extra digits in each hand. I no longer have the fingers. My parents elected to have them removed shortly after birth. There was a video of when everyone found out, but my aunt lost it over multiple moves. The fingers were functional and would have behaved as if they were part of the intended 10. I have a scar on each pinky from where they were removed. As an extra fun fact, my older sister had 2 extra toes that did not actually grow and show. They found this out in high school when she broke her foot, and they went in for x-rays and found that she has extra bones in her foot that just never grew out into toes. My hand is shaped completely normal. The fingers were like a double pack of Twix were there side by side. The only thing that I would not have been able to do was move sideways very far as there was not a lot of webbing between the original pinky and the extra pinky. Story 8. I was actually homeless for 4 years between 19 to 23 years old. As silly as it sounds, I used to earn some extra money at the time by helping around in a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. It was my biggest hobby when I was younger. It was something I felt confident about. I also didn't have a passport or a bank account, so I couldn't get a normal job, UK. Anyway, so at the time I was stuck not earning enough money without a passport, a bank account, or a real job. In the UK, you won't get hired by 99% of companies if you don't have a passport to prove you have the right to work. So one day I got a phone call from a studio asking if I played Yu-Gi-Oh! And would consider myself a geek, and also if I wanted to be in a TV show. They said they would send me to another country as part of it. Being homeless, the biggest problem is being bored, so naturally I said yes. I told them I don't have a passport.
No problem. We'll get you one straight away and pay for it ourselves. I ended up on a show called Geeks that you can still watch on Channel 4 on demand. Because I got this passport, I was finally able to get a job, a bank account, and finally a house. Now I'm looking after my 10-month-old daughter who's playing while I type this. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Saved me from being homeless. I might be an anime character. There are some people who are a little doubtful that it can be so hard to get a job while homeless or to get ID and are shocked it's taken me long to get out. What's important isn't what you know about the world right now. What's important is what I knew about the world as a 19-year-old that just left school. Think back to that age and honestly ask yourself how easy it would be to get a job without a bank, a home or address, ID, or experience of anything. Of course, now as a 27-year-old, I'm armed with so much more knowledge to find a way out. Story 9. How I Met My Wife. I'm from the Netherlands, she's from the US. We met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel, decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us and we hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 3 months. 2 days after I leave, I lose my phone. Don't have any way to get back in touch with her. I had a little money and could stay and work with the people in the desert, but I kept thinking about her, so after a week I say I'm leaving. Take the next bus, which goes 3 times a week at 5 a.m., then a train to Tel Aviv. I have no idea how to find her, where to stay, and very little money. I email a couple of hostels to find a work and stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance. I get an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv. I can come in for an interview because they have a spot. This is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping off my belongings, I went back to the first hostel to see if they would give me information. They wouldn't give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city of more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kind of defeated, I start wandering around, exploring the city. After a couple of hours, I get hungry and decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well out of the tourist area and find a place that's almost empty and rather cheap. I sit down and order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food, I see my now wife walking past the restaurant. She sees me, I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and just kind of grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking. I throw like 200 shekels, way too much, in the table and sprint after her. Explained, and the rest is history. Story 10. I lived in Florida for the first 18 years of my life and spent most of my free time outdoors, fishing, camping, and what have you. The summer before my junior year of high school, I found myself out hiking nearby my home with a buddy. We were stomping around in some clay deposits inside of a little ravine. Even minimal geographic relief is dramatic in a place as flat as the Gulf Coast. When it started to Florida rain, for those of you who can't relate, imagine a torrential downpour. Our minds immediately jumped to the exciting possibility of a flash flood raging through the crevices we were exploring. In an effort to make our day more exciting and not take any chances, we began to climb vertically out of the canyons versus taking the long path out of it horizontally. We got to the top, put our feet on the ground, and did pull up. As I stood up, I felt the ground underneath me squirm. I'd stepped on a snake. I screamed and kicked the snake that was latched onto my foot off me by reflex. As an Eagle Scout, I immediately recognized the red-on-yellow pattern as the snake slithered away and knew it was a coral snake. We rushed home, drove to the hospital, and were seen. The doctors informed my parents the nearest anti-venom was a 3-hour helicopter ride away. The first symptom, lung failure, would occur after 2 hours. My parents called my friends and family, and we all spent time together without me knowing my fate. My friends and family arrived and subsequently left together. My parents turned off the lights and we prayed together. Around 2 hours after being bitten, a nurse came into our dark room with a gurney to collect my dead body. I asked the nurse, "Have there been any developments?" To her surprise, the doctors came in, shocked I was alive, and told me it was a dry bite, and that I should remain whatever religion I practiced. Story 11. My life. And not in the cliche, "Oh my god, the sperm made it to the egg" kind of way. My father was married to somebody else and was officially missing and was last seen in the USA. My mother was a drug addict and an alcoholic living on the streets of the downtown east side of Vancouver. She was already pregnant according to the pee test she took. She smoked, she did drugs, she drank, she did God knows what else to get her hands on those things. Somehow I was born underweight but with only mild FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, caused by all of that. I ended up in foster care going in and out from 2 to 5 until becoming a ward of the province. I went on to get my bachelor's and have broken the cycle. My children have a safe home and food on the table. They know they're loved. Story 12. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital and they told us that I probably have stomach flu and should go to the doctor the next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40 degrees Celsius and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to the ER and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. We went to the ER and I stayed in the hospital for about 2 weeks, but they couldn't find anything. They treated me with a broad range of antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better. They told me to go home and recover. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home and that pirates were coming to steal our food. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on and she looked at me like I had summoned a devil. She took my temperature and she instantly took me to the ER again. I had a 41 degrees Celsius fever. When we went back to the hospital, I got treated immediately for inflammation and they did a wide range of tests again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they couldn't find it. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found out what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having the hallucinations, but on all the scans they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later, I would have died because of the pus flowing into my body. Apparently, there's a 1% chance in all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans, or that the area was so inflamed that they didn't see it. So after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks, they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed in the hospital for over 4 weeks just because of my appendix and my bad luck on being that 1%. Story 13. Not me, my wife. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida. She rarely gets sick but has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she had a low fever and complained of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. That weekend, she wanted to see the doctor. I told her she probably had the flu, just wasn't used to the aches and she always has trouble sleeping. But if she was still feeling bad Sunday, we'd go to a clinic. Saturday night, she couldn't sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. But on our way there, sure enough, she's feeling better. The doctor checks her out, she's feeling fine now, with no fever. She says she probably had meningitis but is recovering. I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, Monday, and ask him if he thinks it's fine if I go. She says, yeah, no problem. That evening, my wife is eating and laughing and all is good. Monday morning, I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium. My wife didn't know where she was, so the neighbor drove her to the ER. I book a flight home that night. The hospital checks her out, she has a fever, her blood cell count is in the basement, and she's completely out of it mentally. They're not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history, where we've been, etc. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and is put on a cocktail of meds while they figured it out. On the 3rd day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite. Maybe tick-borne. She'd been to the Midwest recently and could have caught it if she went walking in the woods or a park. The next day he comes in, figured out the parasite. Why didn't you tell me she left the country? Huh? She hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria? I thought you couldn't get that in the US. You can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. What the hell? I retrieve her passport, CDC comes and does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps are set up around the neighborhood, and mysterious vans start driving, spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week but recovers just fine. If you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report, you'll see a discussion of malaria, and how a certain number of cases are related to people recently returned from endemic areas, except for one woman in Duval County, Florida, who received it from a cryptic vector. Found a CDC malaria surveillance report from that year. Case 2. In November 10, a woman aged 31 years sought treatment at a hospital emergency department for fever, severe headaches, nausea, vomiting, and malaise. She was admitted to the ICU for severe hyponatremia, thrombocytopenia, tachycardia, borderline splenomegaly, and epistaxis. Both the hospital and CDC confirmed a P. falciparum severe malaria infection with approximately 10% parasitemia. She was treated with oral quinine, clindamycin, and oral doxycycline, and recovered successfully. Probable routes of transmission were investigated. The patient stated that she had not traveled outside of the United States during the preceding 2 years and had no history of malaria. In 2008, she traveled to Nicaragua and stated that she had received malaria chemoprophylaxis at the time of her trip. She reported no history of blood transfusion or IV drug use. Mosquito trappings conducted around her home in Florida revealed no Plasmodium-infected mosquitoes and no additional malaria cases in close contacts or persons residing in the area near her home. The origin of the infection remains undetermined. Story 14. I was struck by lightning while talking on landline. This was in the early 90s. Lightning struck the telephone line and traveled through the handset to my ear. My parents drove me to the ER. I couldn't talk very well. My brain knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth didn't want to say it. I had a terrible stutter. My doctor told me that I had had a dose of good old-fashioned electroshock therapy. My speech was normal the next day, but I get a terrible headache whenever a thunderstorm comes through. Story 15. I slept wrong one night and pinched a nerve in my neck so severely I lost the right side of my body. It just went silent like it wasn't there for months. I woke up in the worst pain I've ever experienced and couldn't talk, move, or do anything. The ER doctor thought I was having a stroke. My doctor had never seen a case as severe as mine, and it was purely a freak accident. Recovery took months, but I have used my leg and hand again, with some numbness. Other than pain and spasms, I'm mostly back to normal. Story 16. I have an eye story. So one day there was a sudden windstorm while I was in an open parking lot on the outskirts of a city, and a leaf flew right into my eye, and it immediately started to hurt. I somehow drove home and my eye was constantly hurting. I washed it a few times, didn't work. I started to feel movement inside my eye but couldn't see anything in the mirror. I freaked out and started gently poking around in my eye with my index finger. A tiny little dot came out and moved a little on the tip of my finger. Ran to my mom, showed her, and she couldn't see anything. To be honest, it was so freaking tiny and barely moved. It hurt for an hour and I found 2 more tiny moving freaks in my eye. I was convinced I wasn't just seeing things. Then finally my mom took me to an eye surgeon. Went in as an emergency, and the doctor examined and rushed me to an OR saying I had living microorganisms inside my eye. It took about 20 minutes and they removed all 14 of them. Alive! Got a patch like a pirate that I had to wear for a few days. Doc said he'd never seen anything like it in his 25 years of experience. Said I was a 1 in a million case, and if I had taken a day to come in, chances were high that I would be blind.